What do you know about Interpol? Despite the common belief that it's some kind of super agency that can reach anyone and anything, that's not true. In fact, Interpol officers don't even have agents with arrest powers. That's a myth made up by movies and some media. Even though Interpol has been around for over a century, there are still plenty of legends, myths, and inaccuracies about it. It's a huge organization that works as a link between the police forces of Interpol member countries, and this cooperation is based on various databases, standardized procedures, and other analytical and informational standards that have been developed over decades and still work effectively today.
Back in 1935, we launched a special radio network for sharing police information. Today, a secure web system allows police to access our databases in real time. But the very first initiatives, discussing extradition procedures, identification methods, and record-keeping, form the foundation of our work today. Tracking fugitives remains at the core of what we do, and our databases contain millions of global criminal records.
These databases are so huge that police around the world use them an average of 20 million times a day. That's 250 queries per second. The story of Interpol is really the story of police from 194 countries communicating with each other to achieve a common goal. But it's also a story about how inefficient this organization can be, especially when it becomes a tool for crimes by leaders of some authoritarian countries. Clearly, a giant organizational structure like this isn't without its downsides. And today we're going to dig into that. Hi everyone, my name's Alex Blackwood, and you're on the channel Behind the Scenes of Power. Great to see those of you here for the first time, and big hugs to those who subscribed and stuck around. In this video, we're talking about Interpol. Why was there even a need to unite all the world's police into a single network? How does Interpol work, and why can't it make arrests? How do dictatorial regimes use this organization? What are the criticisms against Interpol? And is it really as effective as people say? You can support this video with a like or a comment. The main idea behind creating Interpol was to find ways to help police in different countries work together more effectively to solve crimes. This included procedures for data collection, issues around arrests or extradition, identification methods, and ways to centrally track criminal cases. The first attempts to organize something like Interpol happened in the early 20th century. The need arose because international travel was increasing, trade was booming on a large scale, and with that came more transnational criminals hiding across different countries. Law enforcement needed a way to track these people and take action against them. But how could that happen when police methods differed from country to country? Who would oversee or coordinate all of this? That's exactly why Interpol was created. The first major attempt took place at the International Criminal Police Congress in Monaco in 1914. Lawyers and diplomats from over 20 countries gathered there to figure out how to work together effectively toward a common goal. And while history makes it sound like a perfect start for the birth of an organization like Interpol, the reality is that this Congress actually happened largely because of the efforts and concerns of just one person.
The seeds of Interpol were first planted in 1914, when police from around the world gathered in Monaco for the first International Criminal Police Congress. This was organized at the request of Prince Albert of Monaco, who was seeking advice on how best to deal with thieves targeting his casino. Representatives from 24 countries came together and started sharing information, not just about Prince Albert's problems, but also about what they called 12 wishes for future cooperation between law enforcement agencies.
Those so-called 12 wishes, or what we now call the principles, became the foundation of Interpol. Among them were giving police departments the ability to contact each other directly, using free forms of communication, introducing a common language, conducting joint training, and having resources to identify criminals by fingerprints. On top of that, there was centralized record keeping, implementing fast and effective policies, and more. Honestly, there were just too many good ideas. These principles have largely stayed the same to this day. Of course, over time, and with new technological challenges, some approaches have changed, but the core idea hasn't. Interestingly, despite the work done in Monaco, the idea of a unified police system stayed on the back burner, maybe because of World War I, or maybe because it just didn't seem realistic at the time. Still, the idea came back. In 1922, the US tried to push this initiative at an international police conference in New York, but that attempt also failed.
A year later, in 1923, at another International Criminal Police Congress in Vienna, a new initiative was proposed, led by Johannes Schober, the head of the Vienna Police Department. 22 delegates agreed to establish the International Criminal Police Commission, the direct predecessor of Interpol. The new organization was based in Vienna.
The founders of the new organization were police representatives from Austria, Germany, Belgium, Poland, China, Egypt, France, Greece, Hungary, Italy, the Netherlands, Japan, Romania, Sweden, Switzerland, and Yugoslavia. Over time, the British joined in 1928, and the U.S. only signed on officially in 1938, although Washington's representatives had been unofficially participating in all the activities organized by the new police structure. But let's go back a bit to the early stage of Interpol's creation. Everyone agreed that such an organization was needed to coordinate police actions across countries. This would allow criminals to be caught quickly anywhere in the world. Since Interpol doesn't have the power to make arrests, the only thing it can do is provide access to a centralized database. Back then, this meant mail, telegrams, telephone services, basically anything related to documentation. Today it's the same concept, just fully digital, which makes finding criminals, or anyone else, much faster. To allow police from different countries to communicate effectively, a common language or standard was needed. They initially considered Esperanto, but quickly abandoned it. It wasn't realistic to expect everyone to learn a language that wasn't widely used. Instead, the working languages of Interpol at its founding were French and English. Later, Spanish was added, and in 1999, Arabic officially joined. So today, Interpol communication officially happens in 4 languages: English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. Now, how does Interpol actually work? The main coordinating body is the General Secretariat, which handles day-to-day operations. It employs both civilians and police officers, and its main headquarters is in Lyon, France. There's also a global innovation complex in Singapore, as well as several satellite offices in different regions. Each Interpol member country has its own National Central Bureau, NCB. Basically, this acts as a central communication hub between the police forces of different countries and the main headquarters. Each NCB is managed by police representatives from that country. In short, Interpol isn't a network of the world's police forces. It's a network of national central bureaus coordinating their actions on information sharing. Each bureau also collects data for its own country, crime statistics, reports, and any activities that could go into the databases. Imagine this. French police need current crime statistics in Algeria. Instead of contacting NGOS or other institutions, they simply access the Algerian National Central Bureau's database and get everything they need. This system provides information not only on trends and threats, but also on specific individuals. Interpol is essentially an internet designed for law enforcement. Speaking of structure, there's also the General Assembly, the governing body that meets once a year to make joint decisions. And while Interpol tries to describe the complexity of its work, in practice, at least recently, it operates as efficiently as possible with one main goal in mind.
Extradition is a key element of police cooperation. From the very beginning, the primary goal was to establish mechanisms for quickly sending extradition requests, and also to ensure that such a request could serve as the basis for a temporary arrest.
Extradition at Interpol is called a red notice. The first one was issued in 1947 for a Russian wanted for murdering a police officer. How does it work? When the police believe a criminal may have fled, or has already fled abroad, the law enforcement agency of the country seeking the criminal can request a red notice. It's often called the biggest wanted poster in the world. National bureaus of member countries receive the notice, which includes information on the criminal's appearance, a list of charges, and a brief summary of the situation. But it's important to know, a red notice is not an arrest warrant. Each country decides whether or not to detain the suspect. I'll go into more detail about this unique extradition method later, because it's one of the main reasons Interpol faces criticism. All Interpol countries are connected through a communication system called I-24/7. This network allows national bureaus to communicate quickly and securely, or coordinate in more detail with the General Secretariat. It also gives access to any of the 19 Interpol databases. Interpol puts a lot of focus on coordinating police with experts in different areas of crime. They gather in working groups or conferences to share experience and ideas. And, as you might guess, all this collected information eventually goes into the databases. These databases are diverse. They can include information on criminals and crimes, names and fingerprints, stolen passports, or even travel documents, and it all updates instantly. Any member country can access the data, primarily to support investigations, forensics, analysis, and tracking fugitives worldwide. That's why a lot of time is also spent on training, so Interpol staff and police officers in member countries know how to work effectively with different agencies in different situations.
This experience supports national efforts to fight crime in 4 global areas that are considered most relevant today: terrorism, cybercrime, organized crime, and financial crime, including anti-corruption efforts.
Each of these areas requires constant adaptation and flexibility. Corruption, for example, is full of schemes and loopholes. That's why close cooperation with other countries on sensitive or tricky issues is so important. Only together has Interpol been able to bust smuggling operations or expose networks trafficking illegal migrants across borders. Do they do this all the time and efficiently? That's a rhetorical question. Yes, the number of solved cases or uncovered schemes is very small, but it's something. If countries tried to do it separately, the results would be even lower. Since Interpol is a global organization, it provides the main platform for police cooperation. Officers can coordinate even if their countries don't have formal diplomatic relations. Whether they want to help each other at a political level is another question, but the important thing is that the option for cooperation exists. Now for my favorite part about how Interpol works. Throughout its history, even today, it calls itself politically neutral, not because it blindly follows orders or just obeys the law, but because it doesn't interfere in political matters. And this all started during World War II.
After the Anschluss in 1938, the Vienna-based organization fell under the control of Nazi Germany. It wasn't until 1942 that the Commission's headquarters were moved to Berlin. During this period, most member states stopped supporting Interpol. From 1938 to 1945, the presidents of Interpol were Otto Steinhäusel, Reinhard Heydrich, Arthur Nebe, and Ernst Kaltenbrunner, all high-ranking SS officials. Kaltenbrunner was the top SS officer and was executed after the Nuremberg trials.
It wasn't until after World War II that Interpol was revived as an international criminal police organization. Belgians, French, Scandinavians, Americans, and the British spearheaded the process. It was after the war that Interpol got its current name, and the story behind that is interesting too. The previous version of Interpol had been tainted by its role in World War II, so the new conference basically wanted to distance itself from its predecessor. This was really the creation of a new organization. Coincidentally, or maybe not, in 1968, the president of Interpol was elected as Paul Dickkopf, who had been an SS member, and it so happened that Interpol only began pursuing Nazi criminals in the 1980s. Until then, they had basically turned a blind eye, claiming they didn't want to get involved in political scandals or investigations with political motives. That was their official explanation. When asked directly why Interpol didn't go after war criminals, they said it was because of Article 3 of their constitution, which prohibits intervention in political matters. That's the organization. Still, they continue to claim that, to support and strengthen the international policing system, Interpol uses 5 main tools. Let's go through them quickly. First, facilitating information exchange. This is primarily about a centralized hub for member countries, allowing them to share critical information about events, processes, or individuals. In seconds, any police officer can access almost any data on a person of interest. Second, supporting investigations. Mostly, this involves training personnel and providing access to technical expertise. Experts believe this strengthens the capacity of national law enforcement agencies to fight global crime. Third, and in my opinion, the most important, is helping track down and extradite fugitives. On one hand, it's a key tool to bring criminals to justice, no matter where they are. On the other, dictatorial regimes often abuse this system, turning Interpol into a tool for persecuting dissidents. Fourth, promoting operational cooperation, coordinating joint work of police groups to combat organized crime together. Fifth, developing global databases. And as you already know, there are plenty of them. They also have interesting projects that assist professional work, like the Roxanne project.
With the Roxanne project, law enforcement agencies in the EU have a powerful surveillance tool. The system can recognize people in phone calls by their voice. It also uses traces that suspects leave in public places or online. The European Commission is developing a procedure for identification based on spoken words. The Roxanne platform is designed to process large volumes of data, combining audio files with other information about a person. To investigate networks of suspects, the platform can analyze videos using facial recognition, including footage from public surveillance cameras or videos uploaded to YouTube or Facebook.
The Roxanne program involves 24 European organizations from 16 countries. Half of them are law enforcement agencies or ministries of internal affairs. In Germany, even universities, Saarland and Hanover, participate in the project. Israel is the only non-European country to take part. The Roxanne project is constantly evolving. Based on biometrics, future versions plan to incorporate additional characteristics. For example, since suspects often use prepaid SIM cards, analysts may be able to track a person based on previously used phone numbers, email addresses, geolocation data, or timestamps. In other words, hiding in a digital world is extremely difficult. Another technology is voice comparison and matching. For instance, if police have a suspect's voice recordings, Interpol experts can run them through their databases to find matching voice prints. If matches are found, this can help determine the device used for recording, the location, and geolocation. The system is even believed to be able to recognize multilingual audio files. So, if a person is in a conversation with multiple speakers, the system can still isolate the target individual. It may also indicate age, gender, and accent of each voice captured. The system has many additional functions, but these are not publicly disclosed. Naturally, Interpol would not reveal all its capabilities. Some of the information already available may even be exaggerated, as is common for organizations of this scale.
In April 2019, the 2-year DTEC project was launched. It processes photos and videos from social media. Interpol receives the data through official channels. DTEC is based on facial images provided by national agencies, regional monitoring platforms, and industry and commercial OSINT sources.
But the usual suspects are not run through programs like DTEC. The comparison of faces, voices, phone numbers, passport data, and other information applies only to the most dangerous criminals, such as terrorists or serial killers. If it's just a robber, no one will bother involving Interpol in their search. At least, that's the case today. Or if they do, Interpol tries, often unsuccessfully, to keep it quiet. And speaking of this lack of transparency, Interpol often searches not just for criminals. The organization issues several color-coded notices. Yellow notice, issued to help locate missing persons or identify people who cannot do so themselves, like those who lost their parents, were kidnapped, or disappeared mysteriously. Blue notice, used to gather more information about a person, their location, or activities. It doesn't guarantee further action or extradition, but it can lead to a notice being upgraded, placing the person under active search. Black notice, a request for details about unidentified remains. It has no expiration and can remain active until the case is closed. Green notice, issued to warn about individuals who committed a crime and may commit another, possibly in another country. Orange notice, issued to alert the public about a situation, person, object, or process that may pose a serious threat to public safety. Purple notice, a request for details about tools, devices, or methods criminals use to conceal their activities. There's also a special notice coordinated with Interpol and the UN Security Council, targeting individuals and organizations under UN sanctions. These notices inform law enforcement about restrictions, asset freezes, arms embargoes, travel bans, etc., with the severity depending on the actions of the person or company. Earlier, I mentioned the infamous Red Notice, Interpol's international arrest request. Once Interpol approves this notice, the dossier on the wanted person is available to all police units connected to the organization. Red notices are particularly popular in countries like Turkey, China, Russia, and some Arab states, as they serve as an effective tool for international pursuit and even repression of dissidents or opposition figures. The danger of this notice is that those targeted are not informed of their international status, and removing this red label is extremely difficult. Suspects can be detained at any moment in any country, and the action is indefinite. For example, the president of the World Uyghur Congress was pursued via a red notice for 21 years. Similarly, countries like Turkey or Russia can use it against anyone they consider a threat to their regime.
Once a red notice is issued, people have to live not only in fear of repression from the state that's targeting them, but also in fear of cops in all 193 member countries. On top of the constant risk of being arbitrarily arrested and extradited, those affected may be unable to open bank accounts, cross borders, or find a job. So red notices aren't used only as a tool for political persecution or extradition. For some countries, it's enough simply to make a person's life abroad as difficult as possible.
According to Interpol's statute, red notices cannot be issued for political or religious reasons. For the same reasons, Interpol does not take on every case or every suspect in order to avoid getting dragged into political affairs. Interpol ostensibly tries to monitor all such requests, but like any control mechanism, it can be bypassed, for example by issuing a fraudulent arrest warrant. One of the most obvious examples is the nephew of former opposition figure Fethullah Gulen. He was arrested and extradited from Kenya to Turkey on the basis of a forged warrant alleging child abuse. That's Interpol. Once in Turkey, however, he was illegally convicted for participation in a so-called terrorist organization, not for abuse of minors. There are other examples. A Bahraini dissident and human rights defender, Ahmed Jafar Muhammad Ali, was extradited from exile in Serbia on the basis of an Interpol red notice. He was handed over to Manama, the capital of Bahrain, where he fell directly into the hands of the local repressive authorities. This happened despite attempts by the European Court to intervene. The demand was clear: cancel the red notice, since Muhammad faced the threat of torture and execution, specifically for political activity. Even before fleeing to Serbia, he had been detained and tortured for participating in anti-government protests. After his escape, he was sentenced in absentia to life imprisonment. In 2017, 2 of Muhammad's co-defendants were tortured and then executed. Knowing full well what fate awaited him in Bahrain, Interpol still did not revoke the red notice. Thus, authoritarian states skillfully use this mechanism as a tool to reach individuals who are inconvenient to them, even beyond their own borders.
Thus, Interpol becomes a tool of repression used by autocracies and dictatorships, as well as by their allies in supposedly democratic countries. This transnational disregard for human rights emphasizes the fact that no single state, no matter how democratically legitimate or vocal about human rights, can be fully trusted.
The topic of red notices is so extensive in criticisms of Interpol that it even concerns refugees. In 2017, the organization adopted a resolution that was supposed to be a cornerstone for the protection of refugee rights. It has many aspects, but the key one here is: any red notice must be removed if the person has been recognized as a refugee. Moreover, if a person claims refugee status and comes from a country that persecutes them, it should logically follow that the international notice represents a threat to their life and health. Such individuals should therefore be transferred to appropriate centers, camps, or authorities where they will be protected. This policy should reflect Interpol's commitment to the principle of non-refoulement, a key element in Article 33 of the 1951 Refugee Convention. That document prohibits returning refugees to a country where their life or freedom may be threatened because of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Interpol plays a crucial role in ensuring that people fleeing political persecution do not become targets of their governments. There is a clear difference between a criminal who commits a terrorist act and a person who expresses political dissent and is forced into hiding because of their views. However, the effectiveness of these rules and principles largely depends on the honesty of Interpol member states. When that trust is abused, it undermines not just the foundation of international cooperation, but the entire structure, revealing it in the most negative light. A vivid example of this is Moldova and the accusations against Vitaly Perloga. He once headed Interpol's Commission for File Control, a position requiring maximum honesty and transparency. because the Commission ensures that Interpol notices, black, red, green, orange, or any other, comply with international law and do not violate human rights. Perloga was accused of abusing his official position.
An investigation conducted by Rice Moldova showed that Perloga allegedly facilitated fraudulent asylum applications for at least 26 individuals in Moldova. It is reported that many of these individuals were connected to organized crime networks, yet they were able to obtain refugee status in Moldova using fabricated claims of persecution. Once granted asylum, Interpol's refugee resolution was used to remove red notices issued against them, thereby protecting them from judicial prosecution.
Journalists from the New York Times described this fraudulent operation as a coordinated scheme involving corrupt Moldovan officials and intermediaries who used Interpol's guarantees to protect criminals from extradition. Vitaly Pirlog allegedly received bribes for these actions, although the exact amounts were not specified in the investigation. Such schemes seriously undermine trust in Interpol and globally demonstrate the vulnerability of the international law enforcement system. For refugees and truly persecuted people, these scandals reduce confidence in the system, which is supposed to protect them. The problem with Interpol is that such incidents occur fairly often, which ultimately harms efforts to fight transnational crime. For example, in 2015, Interpol was involved in a scandal related to FIFA. The organization received millions of euros annually for its operational needs, raising doubts about its impartiality. Interpol also signed agreements with large private companies, including tobacco, Philip Morris, pharmaceutical, Sanofi, and technology firms, Kaspersky Lab. These voluntary donations increased Interpol's budget by almost 1/3, but suspicions arose that Interpol did not act against those who paid it, which constitutes bias and abuse of authority by certain individuals.
In any case, apart from the FIFA agreement, close ties with the private sector provide other examples of potential conflicts of interest. In 2012, Philip Morris International, the American tobacco giant, donated 15 million euros to be paid over 3 years to fund Interpol's operations against tobacco counterfeiting. Later that same year, Interpol was excluded from participating in the World Health Organization Convention on Tobacco Control due to its financial ties to the tobacco company.
And there are actually numerous examples like this because Interpol is criticized not just for trying to stay out of politics, carefully selecting cases, or for abusing red notices. At the very end of this episode, let's also talk about the fact that, as of today, besides constantly tracking criminals, Interpol still has one important active operation called Identify Me. This isn't exactly an operation in the traditional sense. It's more like a public appeal to identify women whose bodies were found in 6 European countries. Today, it is believed that most of the victims were murdered, although there are all the signs of a serial killer. Certain details suggest that this might not be the case. Overall, this case is quite strange. Most of the victims are women with developmental disabilities. Some of them died or were killed 10, 20, 30, or even 40 years ago. The bodies were found in Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain. Despite the fact that police from 6 countries are working on the Identify Me case, far from all victims have been identified. Partly because some incidents occurred a long time ago, and partly because some victims are from other countries. Overall, it is unclear how they ended up in these 6 European countries.
Interpol issued a black notice for each victim, even though these notices are intended only for the police. We published excerpts from them. We shared some details of each case, including reconstructed facial images, in the hope that someone might recognize them and help determine the circumstances of their deaths.
With some cases, identification was possible. The British citizen Rita Roberts was identified 31 years after she was killed in Belgium. One of her relatives recognized her from a tattoo shown in the news. The 33-year-old Ainhoa Izaga and Beata Lima from Paraguay were found in Spain. Her identity was confirmed through fingerprints in 2025. The work is still ongoing, and there is a tremendous amount of it. In fact, if we set aside criticism of Interpol and some violations, the organization really has an important mission: combating international crimes, groups, or individuals who commit crimes and then hide in third countries. Criminals need to be caught and punished according to the law, a fact. But ideally, the organization itself should also follow the law because everyone should be equal before it.
And I thank you for watching this video until the end. Like or dislike, comment, share this video, and make sure to subscribe to the channel to help it grow. See you later.